The Supreme Court has finally released its ruling on this long-awaited case, saying that Trump has immunity from official acts. In several cases, they cite what official acts may be, but they also leave a number of others open for lower courts to make a final determination on. We're going to be talking a lot about the legal implications of all this. I want to first bring in CNN's Van Jones and Scott Jennings. Van, as you look at this, what stands out to you?
Well, it's a very concerning outcome. You know, there's a maxim that says in law, bad facts create bad law. So when you have somebody doing stuff that's so terrible, the stuff that Trump did in office, it creates these bad facts. The court has to come in and figure out what to do about it. It often creates bad law. Basically, the question is, Supreme Court, do you more care about the unlawful conduct of a sitting president or possibly the unfair prosecution of a former president? That's really what they had to balance. They're obviously more concerned about the latter. And so I think politically, it's bad. It makes the Supreme Court look very partisan. They're supposed to be wearing these kind of black and white umpire jerseys or whatever. They look like they're wearing red jerseys or even MAGA hats. It's going to go down bad politically for the Supreme Court. It's also scary because what is Trump going to do? If Trump gets elected and there's this idea that he can get away with even more stuff, that's really, really scary for the public because he already ran over every norm that he could. So it seems like, I'm just looking at this politically, not legally, politically, it's almost like a license to thug in a way. Like, you can do whatever you want, and the Supreme Court is probably going to let you get away with it. That is very frightening in this case. And so I'm very, very concerned.
Scott Jennings, Justice Sotomayor, in her dissent, essentially makes that argument, saying the main takeaway of today's decision is that all of a president's official acts, defined without regard to motive or intent, are entitled to immunity that is at least presumptive and quite possibly absolute.
I want to buy your house. I can pay you cash for your house, no matter what condition it's in. If you need to sell your house for any reason.
Yeah, look, I think there's some amount of overreaction here. I mean, after all, they did kick it back down to the lower court, so some decisions could be made about differentiating between official and private acts. But look, this court has stood up for the office of the presidency and the executive power of the presidency in a way that, you know, may be of some benefit to future presidents. I mean, we're looking at this through the lens of Donald Trump, but, you know, the President of the United States has a lot of power for a reason. And they do take a lot of official actions. And I think about a future where, you know, if it was open season on presidents for time immemorial, you know, what action would any president ever take out of fear of being dragged into a courtroom every time they did it? So I hear Van, and I think there's interesting arguments on both sides of this today. I've listened to some of arguments like what Van has made. But at the same time, I do think the office deserves a lot of protection and a lot of deference because of the special place that it holds in our system. So I'm okay with it, especially because I think a lower court may have decisions to make in the future, of course, depending on the outcome of the election in November.
But Van, just to be clear, even if a lower court makes a ruling, then that can't, because what the Supreme Court says is that can be appealed ultimately back to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, look, I think the Supreme Court is really hurting itself here. I mean, I think most Americans on either side would have preferred us getting some kind of finality around these cases. And what you see is the Supreme Court just dragging this out and dragging this out. They could have weighed in on all this stuff back in March and cleared the decks on this one way or the other. They didn't. They say, go through the whole process and you come back up here. Then they wait 60 plus days past the buzzer to give us this decision. The way it's structured, this thing is going to ping pong back and forth for 3 or 4 more years, maybe. It seems like they're doing Donald Trump a favor when they don't have to. The ruling does seem to be much more concerned about unleashing the presidency than constraining the presidency. That's fine, except that there's a different balance here. Now you're concerned about a renegade president. Are you concerned about a renegade president prosecuting someone unfairly after the fact or acting like a rogue or a thug in office? It's not clear what's the greater threat to the republic, and it doesn't seem like the majority really has taken as seriously the concern of half the country about renegade presidencies in the office. I think the Supreme Court is hurting itself. There was, I believe, a way to come to a better outcome, a quicker outcome, an outcome that better balanced the interests here. I think people are going to take away from this, Donald Trump has a Supreme Court that will let him do whatever he wants to, and that is terrifying.
Anderson, if I may, I actually agree with Van that I think a majority of Americans would have preferred a resolution to all this, a debt clearing, before they had to make a decision on voting in November. I think he's right about that. However, on the renegade presidency point, look, the Constitution does give the United States Congress a way to rein in any president at any time they feel like it, and it's called impeachment. And he was impeached twice, and he was acquitted twice. But at the end of the day, this is the wisdom of the founders. They gave us the ultimate political tool to rein in any presidency at any time they felt like it. The other people who can rein in a president are the voters. And voters in November ultimately are going to look at all this and make decisions about whether they're comfortable with Donald Trump or Joe Biden, given the circumstances we know about today. So even if you're upset about the legal decision today, remember, we have political processes in place, and this is another reminder that if the Congress so chose, it could reclaim the power given to it by the Constitution to do a lot of things at any time it wants. It's not done that much lately, but it could if it felt like it.
Van,
I think that's...
Go ahead, Van.
I think you're right, Scott, as far as it goes, but we also know the system's a little bit broken on the congressional side. I think the founders really believed in something which we don't talk about much, which is called Republican virtues. Not Republican versus Democrat. That didn't even exist then. But that anyone who we would elevate would have the virtues to preserve the republic. That was, you look at the Federalist Papers, they didn't imagine that you would have people elevated that act the way that Donald Trump is acting and act the way a lot of people in public office act today. So this is a real test. I'm concerned. It's a real test. If you have someone in office who has no respect for the law, no respect for Republican virtues, no respect for the Constitution, no respect for norms, and then you have a Supreme Court that says, well, you know what? We've never before had to look at whether you could commit crimes. The Supreme Court says there's some crimes you can commit. That's scary, man. Like that's not. I mean, you can't just hope that somehow, you know, the Senate, which is broken, is going to fix this. The Supreme Court is functioning, and it is basically giving a green light for criminal activity in the Oval Office under certain circumstances, which I think, given the present state of our country, is very, very scary.
So, Scott, I mean, under this ruling, do you believe then that a president can, if he reaches out to somebody in the Justice Department to prosecute somebody, or reaches out to somebody in the Justice Department or the military to do something which, if it wasn't the president asking, would be illegal or would have a corrupt end, that he's allowed to do that?
Well, I believe, look, I'm not a lawyer, and Van's got an advantage over me in this debate because he's got a law degree and I don't. So I don't know the answer to your question, but here's what I do know. If the president does anything at all that the United States Congress decides is corrupt, has corrupt intent, or however you just described it, they can take action immediately. They really can. And so, I go back to the ultimate fail-safe that the founders built into our Constitution. And I would think that in some of these extreme circumstances that people who are worried about this ruling keep laying out, ultimately the United States Congress can take control of the U.S. government and throw the president out of office any time they feel like it. So I guess I'm not as worried about the extremities here. And by the way, on Republican virtues,
by the way,
and
Scott, have you noticed some of the folks who are in Congress? I mean, you're putting a lot of faith in the. Maybe you're looking at the Senate as the last bastion. But
listen, I hear you, and I understand what you're saying. No, my faith is in the people of the United States. They elect the Congress. They elect the United States Senate. Ultimately, if you don't have faith in what voters do and who they send, then what are we all talking about here? And you can say that it's broken, and you can argue that people, that you don't like some of them there or whatever. At the end of the day, if we don't have faith in the voters and the people they send, then I'm not sure what we're fighting about today. So I'm going to take a glass half full approach to the people of the United States of America and the system that was set up by our founders.
Van, as you read this, I mean, to the SEAL Team 6 argument, is Sotomayor right that under this ruling, the president can task them to assassinate somebody? Not a political rival, not a foreign leader.
She's not right yet because of this idea that it has to be limited to the core responsibilities of the president. But we don't know because this thing ping pongs back and forth. I don't know. I don't know if this is a Supreme Court that it's going to be able to restrain its basic instinct to grant more and more power to the executive. And so, but the weird thing is, they give more and more power to the executive when you're talking about the president being able to run over every norm. But then they also want to handcuff and stop the federal bureaucracy, our agencies, from protecting the American people when it comes to clean air, clean water, other rulings. So there's this weird thing where it's like the Supreme Court seems to want the president to be almost omnipotent, but they want the federal agencies to be completely impotent.
I disagree with that. I think what the Supreme Court, in all these rulings, Chevron, I think they are screaming at the United States Congress, please fulfill your constitutional duties. Make laws, rein in the executive branch, and up to and including the president if necessary. I think this court is screaming at the people down the street, over in the U.S. Capitol, across the way, and saying, please, for the love of God, do your job as the Constitution orders you to do it.
Van Jones, Scott Jennings, thank you.